Welcome back to Viewpoint, the options. On Thursday, the 24th of June, registered voters in Gibraltar will be asked whether to make greater the circumstances under which a pregnancy may be legally terminated. Tonight, we're live from the leisure cinemas. The Pro-Life Movement is campaigning as Save Babies, Vote No. They're represented here by Karenza Morillo. Welcome. You have 1 minute to make an opening statement.
Yes, thank you for inviting us. This is a very important issue and we are grateful for the opportunity to speak about it. I'd like to start saying that the legislation we're voting on is not a legislation on women's rights. It's a legislation in the Crimes Act, which is offences against the person, and we're talking about the section which is child destruction. And the existing law we have already caters for risk of life to the mother, so no woman will have to die because there's lack of abortion services in Gibraltar. The risk of life to the mother is already covered within our law. If the referendum is passed, however, we will have abortion throughout the 9 months of pregnancy, and it won't be restrictive abortion, it will be wide-ranging abortion, as there is in other countries. I'm confident that once the people understand, and Gibraltar understands the extremity of this law, people will vote no. And it's not a question, if we vote no, that we'll go back to business as usual. There's a lot of issues that need to be tackled here, a lot of social issues and ways in supporting women and families to thrive. And I'm sure and I'm confident that we can work together to address these issues, which are the core issues and the root issues.
Thank you, Karenza. That's 1 minute. Karenza Morillo for the No campaign. Let me tell you what the legal effect of a no vote would be. This is taken again from the neutral information pamphlet which has been produced by the referendum organisers. You should have received one in the post. If not, you can get it from their website. If a majority votes no, then the Crimes Amendment Act 2019 will not come into force, and the circumstances under which a pregnancy may be terminated in Gibraltar will remain in place unchanged. Okay, our first question tonight comes from Selena. Our first question for Karenza comes from Selena.
Hi, good evening, Karenza. I'd like to know what your stance is on IVF since unused embryos are discarded.
I'm not going to get into the IVF situation. I think we're talking about this law, and this law is about abortion on demand for 9 months. This is not what we're discussing here, and I think it's unfair to ask a question on something which is not related to this law.
Karenza, can I ask you just to clarify what your interpretation of abortion on demand means?
Well, abortion on demand or abortion on request, you can call it whatever you want, but it's, at the end of the day, what it means is that a woman will go in to ask for an abortion, and there will be no parameters for that. And I'll explain why, because in the legislation, the way it's written very similarly to the legislation like in places like the UK. And when you look at section 163A in page 3 of our independent guide, you have a few reasons why abortion may be allowed. And we've got the grave permanent injury to the physical and mental health of the woman has been interpreted very liberally. There's no actual definition of that. And specifically the mental health is interpreted very widely. You'll find that mental health is 98% of the abortions in UK are under the mental health clause, and 99.9% of them are under the International Classification of Disorders are a non-specified mental health disorder. In other words, no diagnosis at all. So that means that it's abortion for any reason.
So this is your interpretation of how the law would work in practice?
The law
does say obviously that it needs to go through two GHA doctors.
The law, well, it doesn't actually, because it does say two doctors to begin with, and then it removes it.
Well, only in the event of immediate
Well,
threats.
with a grave permanent risk to physical or mental health of the woman. And again, we repeat the same thing. So basically, it's opening it again. And that's in page 10 if people want to look at it. So in effect, this is what happens in other countries. There's no reason why it wouldn't happen here. And although it does mention 12 weeks at the beginning, if you see sections second, thirdly and fourthly, in those situations there's no prescribed limitation of time, which means that there's no limit for when abortions can happen.
Okay.
And we do have 30-plus lawyers in Gibraltar for no, if anybody, lawyers for no.
Yeah, I just wanted as a matter... As a matter of fact, it is important, I suppose, to distinguish between what the law says and how somebody believes it'll be interpreted
well, that's the whole
and
point,
used in
because
practice.
if you can interpret it any way, then that means it's open.
Sure.
There's no definition.
Okay, our next question, I believe, is Elizabeth.
My question is in two parts. Firstly, could you explain how the proposed law would allow abortions up to 9 months? And secondly, how a girl as young as 13 would be able to have an abortion without their parents knowing? Thank you.
Yes. I've just explained, I think, about the no limitation of time. About the 13-year-old, I think Selena explained about the Gillick's and Frazier competence. The sexual health clinic here, particularly at the moment, has a confidentiality policy for 13 to 16-year-olds, where they can go without the parents' knowledge and consent, and there would be no in the records, and they can have complete confidentiality like any other adult. So that means that with abortion services, we presume it's going to be the same. There's nothing in this law to safeguard or to say that it's any different. So it's safe to presume that 13 to 16-year-olds will be able to access abortion services without the consent or knowledge of the parents.
Next question is from John.
Hi, good evening. I find it quite upsetting that the pro-life movement is publicly stating that in the UK, the 98% of abortions performed on mental health grounds are on-demand abortions. I mean, if any of my 4 daughters ever get pregnant and suffer the mental breakdown or ill health, maybe as a result of rape, I would expect the law and the GHA to cater for the well-being of my poor child. In fact, it needs to be in place now. Are you stating on record, then, that mental health is a scam? That almost all those 98% are not genuine and gaming the system? Thank you.
I think mental health issues are extremely important. I've worked in health services for over 30 years and treated many people with mental health problems. I've worked specifically in mental health as well for quite a number of years. I've got family members with mental health problems, and I also use the services myself, so I certainly don't undermine the mental health problems anybody might have. But having said that, I think we need to acknowledge that there's no evidence-based studies anywhere proving that abortion will treat mental health problem. In fact, it will exacerbate mental health problems, particularly if women are vulnerable in the first place. And I think Selena made some sort of reference to that if they have previous mental health problems, then that might be the case. I think that also, you mentioned rape, and I think there are very hard cases which yes, are very difficult to deal with. Nobody's going to deny that. But those are less than 2% of the cases in the UK. 98%, as I said, are under mental health problems, and 99.9% of them are with undiagnosed mental health conditions, which means that it's not a serious mental health problem that they do have. It's not a diagnosis. So I think that we need to consider that this law will allow for abortion for any reason up to the 9 months, and people need to realise that 1 in 5 pregnancies, almost 1 in 4 now in the UK, are ended. And we can't lose sight, and I agree with Selena that we need to look at the women's circumstances, the family circumstances, of course we do, but we cannot lose sight that it is ending a life that we're talking about. And most of the time, if not all of the time, in those 99.9% of cases, there are social problems, serious social problems, but social problems can be treated and dealt with in other ways. You don't need to end a life to do them. And there's no reason, if ending a life is quite an irreversible decision to make and a life-changing one. And the first thing you're told when somebody has a mental health problem, I've said that to patients myself, and they've told me myself when I've not been well, the last thing you need to do when you have a mental health problem is to make life-changing decisions, you know, when you're in that state of mind. So.
Our next question is from Sonia. Sonia.
Does the pro-life movement accept that there will be cases past the 12 weeks that will require treatment and may be incompatible with pregnancy?
I don't understand.
mind
That it will
repeating
have
the question,
require.
Does the pro-life movement accept that there will be cases past the 12 weeks that will require treatment and that may be incompatible with pregnancy?
Do you mean the woman needs treatment? Yeah. I'm not quite sure what you mean about the 12 weeks, because the abortion will be available with no time limit. Obviously, as I say, that the law at the moment covers the risk of life to the mother, and then that would need to be discussed between the doctor and the woman, as you say, which is quite reasonable. If a woman is not going to survive, the baby's not going to survive either, and it is quite a delicate balance, you know. But at the end of the day, the law that we have now recognizes that the child has rights and is a human being, and that the only time when there's like a competition between mother and baby, say like competing rights, is if there's a risk of life to the mother and the baby. So it's a delicate balance, and that would need to be looked at individually in each case. At the end of the day, the mother's not going to survive, the baby's not going to survive either. So, and life is not perfect. Sometimes there's not ideal solutions, you know. And unfortunately, sometimes the baby will be lost, but it's not an intentional and willful. Because if you look at the independent guide, it does say and explain what they mean by the abortion. It's a willful ending of the life of the child, and that is not the intention when treating a woman. You can treat the woman, and the child might be lost as a consequence, but not because you're intentionally ending the life of that child.
Our next question is from Derek. Derek.
In other countries, the evidence is that abortion is used to discriminate against babies on the grounds of disability, race, or even gender. Nothing in our proposed law precludes this. Do you agree with this?
I think, in my view, abortion is discrimination from the very beginning, because we're discriminating against the most vulnerable and defenseless. And because we have a voice, and we think that because we are born into this world, we have a superior right than the unborn child, is discrimination to begin with. And then, of course, it's quite evident that the babies are being screened in the womb, and then people feel justified in justifying abortions in terms of disability. That, for me, is heartbreaking. I've worked with people with disabilities my whole life, not just people born with disabilities, but people who've acquired disabilities through different conditions, through trauma, through stroke. And it's a terrible message that we're giving to these people.
Nicole?
Hi. What's your position on fatal fetal anomalies? Do you believe a woman should have the right to decide whether she wants to spend the next 20 weeks or so waiting for the worst to happen?
I think fatal fetal abnormalities and abortion in these cases are probably one of the most difficult. Again, I have to say that this law is not about this. It's about abortion on demand for the 9 months, but I will answer your question. No, I know you're laughing, but I will answer your question. Don't worry about that. But I think we need to keep coming back to the fact that we need to discuss the law we're voting on. We cannot change the law. The law is as it is, and we have to say yes or no to the law. And we need to know what the law will allow and will not allow, and we cannot lose track of what it is that we're voting on. I've had personal experience of friends who've gone through this situation, and it's heartbreaking. I think the option of abortion is like the first thing that people think about in this situation, and out of with well-intent, people direct people to abortion. But the option there then puts more pressure on parents who have to make a horrendous decision. I've attended an international conference on fetal anomalies, and apart from the fact that it's very difficult to ascertain when it's going to be a fatal fetal anomaly, and to ascertain when people are going to, how long a baby is going to last or is not, there is a lot of discussion on palliative care. Now, Selena and I both worked in the palliative care team. We've got an excellent team here in Gibraltar, and I think that if we offer these excellent services for people who have been born, there's no reason why we can't offer palliative care services as well for the unborn child and for the parents. And at the end of the day, when I've heard testimonies of parents who've lost their children through different anomalies, and some of them lasted maybe a few minutes, some of them a few hours, some of them weeks, and some of them months and years. Of course they have grief, because losing any child at any point is going to cause you grief, but these people have more peace. They've been able to love the children, to hold them, to have closure. And I'm not saying that people who've had the abortions are bad people or anything like that, but I think we've been denying them out of maybe well-intended, reasons. We've been denying them the opportunity to be able to love the child, however long they've lasted, and to have that closure and peace.
Len.
Good evening. The British Medical Association believes that abortion should be regulated in the same manner as other medical treatments. What is your view on this?
That it should be regulated in the same manner
As other medical treatments.
Well, I think the assumption that abortion is healthcare is something that is quite dishonest, to be honest, because abortion does not treat anything. Abortion ends a life every time. So
Karenza, when do you think life begins?
it's
Or
not a
when
question
does the campaign think that life begins?
It is not a question of when do I think of the campaign believes. It's a question of science, and life begins at conception, and everybody knows that. I think that's non-debatable.
Well, I don't think that it's actually quite so clear. There is
Well,
considerable debate on it online, isn't there?
Well, online, but not with
no, I'm not talking about social media. I'm asking people to go out and Google for themselves. There isn't necessarily scientific consensus on when
Well, if you
life
go
begins.
to an IVF clinic, as somebody mentioned, they know pretty well when life begins. They can tell you from the very beginning.
I think we're going to Douglas next.
Yep. Hello. Right. My question has actually just been answered. My question was, when do you believe that human life begins? Does it begin at conception? Does it begin just, after birth?
Everything begins at the beginning.
Exactly.
And if something is growing, it's alive. So I think it's just ridiculous to even ask, to even debate it, to be quite honest.
It is the ultimate question, though, isn't it? When
Well, but that's been
something
answered by
requires
science.
personhood.
When the laws, like abortion laws in UK or USA, were set, people didn't know about the life in the womb, how quickly the child develops. In the first trimester, the baby is already completely formed. Every organ is there. They just need to mature and develop, and that you can look up anywhere that that's respectable. You don't even have to take our word for it. You can just look in any pregnancy app that you have, in the NHS website, anywhere you want to look. We've had a good, I think, a TED video put out this week. That's not from the pro-life side or anything like that. It's just a TED talk, and we've put it out. So if people are really interested in looking, then you can look it up. And I would really urge people to look at and look up, and not take her word for it, look up the baby development and look at the abortion procedures as well. Because if we're going to vote on something, we need to know what it is that we're voting on. And you need to look at the abortion procedures.
I think we've got one more question which has been submitted to us. And then if anybody else would like to ask a question, please try and grab the attention of our broadcast assistants, Jackie and Melanie. So our last question is from Andrew.
We've heard about the two sides of the debate. We've heard about the rights of women and the rights of the baby. But I just wondered, what about the rights of the man? What role does a man have to play in the abortion debate?
Well, I think it's interesting you've mentioned that, because a lot of people talk about choice, but there's very little choice. If we ask the baby what they would prefer, that is not held into account. The father is not held into account, you know, and if you have a responsible father who wants to protect and bring up the child, they have no right at all. And also about choice, I think one of the serious issues that we need to look at is that this law will not protect conscientious objection for health professionals, even though it appears to do. Because this law, I don't know who's drawn it up, but it's been designed to deceive from the very minute it starts to the very minute it finishes, to the very end of the last sentence. Everything starts with something that appears something, and then it's changed as the clauses go down. And that is the same with the conscientious objection. So the health professionals who are the ones who are going to have to end those lives have no ability or choice to say they won't do it, which is in a way maybe not relevant, because private practice will also be permissible under this law, because it says they will be available under a class of places. If you look at the page 10 here in your booklet.
It says GHA doctors, and the government has previously said...
No, it says, look at page 10. No,
the government has previously said that it wouldn't be allowing for
it
private
says here on page 10
only under the GHA.
That the health minister has the power in relation to treatment too, and then it says the approval and carried out in such a manner as may be specified to approve a class of places. Now that can mean anywhere, and I wouldn't be surprised if we get medical clinics sprouting everywhere.
Giselle has a question.
Good evening. If a child of 13 has an abortion without the permission of the parents, and this child dies in the operating table, what happens? Who's going to tell the parents that the daughter has died in an abortion? I mean, is that human? If a mother loses a child?
I have no answer to that, because I think it's very irresponsible. And it's not just about theatres, because, as they rightly say, now there's medication, but those pills are not without risks, you know, and complications, and there have been many. And I don't think women are prepared, especially a 13-year-old, to maybe live up with the consequences and what's going to happen in that procedure. I won't explain it all, but people can look it up and see what complications and what you would have to deal with after taking those pills as well.
If we are talking about rape and all the fatalities that have been brought up, that I don't know the percentages, but isn't it worse to allow a child to go through a procedure and the parents don't know it, because it would really... Anyway, it's a two-part question.
I think that there's quite a number of people in the community who may be worried about things like rape and things like that. And of course, those are terrible circumstances, and if people are concerned about that, discussions can be had in the community. But this is not the law for that. This law will be, and I'm sorry if I'm repeating myself, because this is what is so important that we need to understand. And I won't back down from that, because I'm confident with what I'm saying, that the abortion will be allowed throughout the 9 months of pregnancy, and because of the mental health clause, will be allowed for any reason whatsoever. And in UK, you've got even doctors who pre-sign the forms, because it's just like a formality that just takes up time for nothing. They don't even have to assess.
Thank you,
and there's
Karenza.
no specification here
You've
that
timed
says
out
that
on that
doctors
one,
have
sorry.
to assess them.
Matthew.
First off, I would like to thank both speakers for having the courage to go in front of us and in front of GBC and the whole of Gibraltar. That's first off.
Thank you, Matthew.
Thank you.
But my question is quite simple. But before I say my question, it's a bit of a preamble, but short, promise. Quite frankly, I am scared. And the reason I'm scared is because this law would make it easier to get rid of people like me. Does that mean that my life is less worthy of living than anyone else just because you're walking? And thankfully I can voice my opinion due to the fact that I am able, because I am alive. But what about those that can't, or those that maybe can't verbalize as well as I can, or they also have rights?
Thank you, Matthew. Karenza, what would you say to Matthew?
I've worked with people with disabilities all my life, and most of them are now my friends as well. I've got friends with Down syndrome. Two of my very best friends have Down syndrome. And we need to acknowledge and recognize that over 90% of people with Down syndrome in the UK don't get to be born. And in places like Iceland, 100% of them are aborted. And I think that's a horrendous statistic. And but I have to say that many of the decisions taken by women and families are based on fear. And the medical profession has a lot of responsibility here. They are instilling fear into parents. They are putting them under tremendous pressure. And nobody has the right to decide what quality of life somebody else will have or not have. And nobody has the right to decide who should be born and who should not be born.
Our last question tonight comes from Erica.
Hi, Karenza. The pro-life movement clearly has an attitude of not in my backyard, and a vote for no effectively would not stop abortions. We can literally see the clinic from our window. Would it not be best for abortions to be performed in our hometown, where we can provide that care to the women, where we could actually supervise and regulate the treatments that are provided? And most notably, this evening you have really stressed that life begins at conception and that an abortion would effectively be murder. However, you have also stated that abortions should be allowed on a case-by-case basis. So how do you balance murder with a case-by-case basis?
Well, I haven't mentioned murder at all. I think you're right. We won't be able to stop all abortions. There's certainly some people who will choose to go and have them regardless. I think it's regrettable that they need to, or they feel the need to. And we certainly won't stop all of them, but we certainly, if you look at elsewhere, the minute that abortion is legalized, the numbers rise up. In the first year only, in Ireland, it's risen by 60%, and that's accounting for the abortion pills online that might, by post. Also, that you mentioned regulation, but there's actually not much regulation or any limitations here in this document. So I'm not sure how you're so sure that how well it is going to be regulated.
Can you
and murder, I haven't mentioned that word at all. What I've mentioned.
Okay. We've timed out.
Okay.
Timed out. Okay. Karenza Morillo is speaking for the No campaign. Thank you for joining us, and thank you to our live studio audience for putting the questions through. You've got 1 minute to give us a closing statement.
I just want to say that nowadays we have the insight of the development of the baby in the womb. We've all seen the scans. We've all seen how they move and how fully formed they are in the first trimester. We cannot argue they're not human beings worthy of life. We're talking about human rights, and that belongs to all of us. This law is about wide-ranging abortion. So if you do not want a wide-ranging abortion for 9 months, then we have to vote no. And if you think and if you feel that every human being deserves human rights, then we have to vote no. And I think Gibraltarian women deserve better. I'm convinced, and I'm assured, and I know, and I passionately believe that we can do better for women if we all work together. We can look at the circumstances and the root causes, because the baby is never the problem, it's the circumstances around them. And we've proven during COVID how capable we are of working together. There's a lot of work being done that many people are not aware of, and that we can build on that. And that is what we need to be tackling. And I'm sure Gibraltar can do much better for our women and our children. We want to be a child-friendly society, as the GSLP had in the manifesto. We want to be a child-friendly city.
The pro-life movement campaigning as Save Babies, Vote No. GBC's coverage of the referendum will continue ahead of the vote on Thursday, the 24th of June. Registered voters in Gibraltar will be asked, should the Crimes Amendment Act 2019 that defines the circumstances which would allow abortion in Gibraltar come into force? If a majority votes no, then the new legislation will not come into force, and the circumstances under which a pregnancy may be terminated will remain unchanged. If a majority votes yes, then the government must bring into force the new legislation, and the circumstances under which a pregnancy may be terminated in Gibraltar will be greater. Remember, you can log on to the website parliament.gi, click on referendum for information on voting stations, frequently asked questions, and also the neutral information document. From the whole team, from the members of the public here tonight, thanks for watching and good night.